I will start with a question for the two of you. I asked you to think a little bit about this ahead of time, but and you're coming from two pretty different perspectives, right? One a little more from a top-down, and one definitely more from a bottom-up, although you'd probably disagree with that crude characterization, but generally speaking, one more from a structural approach, and one throw out all the rules and we'll just do what we want. So I asked you to think about how your experiences and projects could relate to the broader world here, and particularly the developing world, and give us some thoughts about that, how your work and your experiences could be translated into other contexts.
Well, I think it's more like the experience from developing countries that have been translated into my context, which I've learned from, to be honest. I mean, I think a lot of the power in this is what we have for resources, this is what we're doing, and not the professionalization of that, but just the necessity of that has been really inspiring for the work that I do. And then in turn, I think seeing some of the lessons that we've learned. Okay, sure, most places are not Times Square in New York City, I understand that, but again, take away not the project, and feel like you need to drop that, or you shouldn't drop that into your own city, but the process of trying things really incrementally and small, inexpensively. And I think that works for any city of any size, of any context.
Have there been situations, sorry, I should use this. Have there been situations that you've experienced where you do the tactical intervention, or someone does the tactical intervention, but there is no follow-up with the government that says, oh, okay, that was a good idea, and we'll carry this out? That the tactical intervention itself is the implementation that goes forward.
I guess I'm confused by your question. You're asking if we've done the projects where they've just had the 2 days and that's it?
A lot of your examples were, okay, the government at first was against it, and then they implemented it, and they made the curb a reality. Right. But in some places, there is no government, there is no entity to implement afterward.
You're right, and that the idea there is, I think, or the valuable takeaway is that it's the 2-day process is almost as valuable as any of the outcomes. So the fact that you're making it and doing it together with your hands, with neighbors and collaborators, you get the social capital return on that. That is very important. No matter if the project becomes permanent in the long term or the government winds up investing in your community. It's not always about that. And I think there's this interesting interplay between we always have to go to the level of high urban design and beautiful materials and it has to look like it's a first-rate, first city kind of job, to it's good enough and it's serving the purpose and it's the people that make it great.
And so this goes all the way back to our archaeology presentation this morning, that community building and placemaking were not run by professional architects and governments in history. I mean, people make places, right? And it's, I think, re-empowering ourselves to shape our places and particularly our public realm. That's what we're relearning, I guess.
That's a really interesting question. I guess for us, each city is different. And so context is very important. You've got fiscal context, you've got environmental context, you've got cultural context. And so I think there's no one-size-fits-all approach for things. In Auckland, things weren't so great. And so there's a level of leadership required to get the thing going. I mean, what do we pay our civil servants and why do we vote them in if we don't want them to show leadership? And so we have shown a level of leadership. Sometimes you move too fast and you don't take people with you. Sometimes you move too slowly. At the moment, I'm finding that it's more about when rather than why. And that's been a real changeover. And I suppose perhaps with my presentation, it's hard to focus on every aspect of it, but there's a lot more to it, of course, and wonderful people back at the council doing incredible things. I'm just a lucky guy that sort of shouts out about it. But at the end of the day, you need a blend and a whole method or toolkit of different approaches and for different communities. And just this morning, I was interviewed by some chaps doing a bit of a film or a documentary here and asked a similar question. And at the end of the day, there are planning groups in the community who are far better at it than the bureaucracy planning people, more innovative, more creative. And in some cases, we in Auckland have allowed communities to do their own plans for their own areas. Then there is an issue around how you fund lots of these things, but the endeavour is there to have it community-led. But you also need the vision. If you want a laissez-faire vision that allows the city to sprawl to reportedly the third largest city in the world, then that's not a great vision for an economic vision or a strategic vision. So we've had to be quite deliberate about what we've done. So hopefully there's a blend in there, Charles, but you don't have to gold plate everything.
Great. And, I love the way you do things in Australia. So do we have someone who has the microphone to take around? Okay, great. So raise your hand, and we'll start catching some questions. We'll do a couple, and if you really want coffee really badly, there is coffee now. There'll be coffee, throughout the afternoon, but feel free to jump up and go if you have to.
Good morning. I believe it takes more than two to tango. And what you say about when and how, yeah, that's true. A lot of people are asking, what can you do for me now? And it needs to be done now. But what struck me, one of the things that struck me was a streetcar named Desire. But there was a streetcar network that was torn out, and then, now we're coming up with a new fantastic, it's called whatever rail. So the government, doesn't appear to be thinking too much themselves. And I think, the community needs more credit for the things that they do. In Holland, we have a number of projects like the one you just described, where we give, the citizens the chance to do the budgeting for their, their neighborhood. And there's some very good examples that they do much better, an awful lot better. As a matter of fact, the majority of examples I know, the community does better. Because apparently the people in council that are voted for are just people.
Good comment. Okay, how about straight back here?
Leadership or not?
Hello, my question's also about rail. I'm Nick Dawes from Manningham Council in Melbourne, Australia. Manningham's the only council area that doesn't have a train, and our community has been advocating for a very long time for a train line. So, Ludo, I was interested in the process for getting government funding, and you said also some private funding for rail.
Wow, it's a big question. It's the biggest issue for us at the moment is really how we fund our transport infrastructure. As I said, in 1956, we had this wonderful streetcar network, one of the best in the world, actually. And one of the first flights out of Auckland was to LA. And I think we have more in common with somewhere like San Fran than LA. So it's interesting that we've not invested. We've invested in roads and motorways for 50 years. It's really complex. The way we fund the projects is a real issue for us. We take a lot of money from government as well. They have a large central fund. We're having quite big negotiations with our central government partners who want to fund the train line, they're calling it, 3 or 4 years after the time when we want it funded. And so the negotiation is not about if it should happen, is when it will happen. So that's one thing. We used to have a petrol tax, which was able to be levied to pay for the large infrastructure, but that's been removed. So we are now looking to have a road taxing system where you can enter into the city and pay for it that way. So there's a range of ways, and now we've got this idea of, which is not Auckland's idea, but things like tax incremental financing and so forth around using the private sector to regenerate areas because they buy into that conversation. So it's a combination of all the different layers and different factors, but it's expensive stuff. It's just best not to take it out in the first place. As somebody said this morning, retrofitting a city is really hard because the stuff's in. It's like salt and cooking. Once it's in, you've got to put more food in to get the salt taste out. Sorry, that's a bit of a very basic thing to say, but does that make sense in any way?
Okay. Hi. My name is Julia. I work as an urban planner in Manila in the Philippines. And I would say that we are one of those organizations, the one that I work with, that does tactical approaches in a historical area where there's largely no investment and we don't get any of that support. I think one of the good things about that, though, is that we've had it's been a really good tool for awareness building. A lot of the feedback that we get, especially during our festivals, is from people that say, oh, it was really nice on a Sunday to have somewhere to go that wasn't a mall. Since a lot of the development in Manila is led by private sector, it's very much a mall condo type of typology. So we're not getting the results in terms of any kind of funding or commitment, but we are building a community of people who are thinking differently about the city through the tactical approaches, even though we haven't been able to scale up. On the flip side of that, the historical center is unique. Most of the places in Metro Manila, like your streets are overly vibrant. We have people everywhere, and majority of the city is planned in a tactical manner. Is there a way to put in a policy things that we can also leave alone and not plan? Because you already have people putting chairs where they need them, putting markets where they need them, putting housing where they want it, where it works for them based on what they're doing. We're seeing some of that innovation in the informal sector, in the informal housing, where people are paying attention to that and letting people plan for themselves where they want to be and what kind of housing they want to be in. But on the other parts of the public realm, we're not really looking at that, vendors, street space, how that's being used. And I don't know if that's something we can add to the conversation.
Mike,
Yeah,
any experience on that?
No, I think that's great. I mean, there's this really difficult balance between bottom up and top down, but I think we over sanitized our city streets in the North American context a long time ago, largely to make way for people in cars. And every time I'm in a context like Manila, I'm always inspired and fascinated by how people are just able to incrementally kind of come off the sidewalks, do their vending, do their sitting, and they make the space better for them right there, right then, how they need to. And there's sort of an acceptance to that. But if you go way too far in one direction, either way too sanitized or massively informal that nothing can actually occur that's safe or viable in the street, then you need to find that balance. And so in our work, what we try to find a way to do is with cities through policy and approaches is just get a little bit more informal, allow a little more of these things to bubble up and learn from them that can inform some of that longer term policy movement or infrastructure investment.
Okay, and so we've got time for one more question, and we'll have 5 minutes for coffee.
Hi, I do complete streets workshops and help communities implement them. And one of the things that we talk about is what are you measuring and why? Because the metrics are often what beat us up and cause us to get stalled in doing these things. And I think tactical urbanism has perhaps some real applicability along with social media in helping us bring this out as information. For example, why do we want level of service A for cars on city streets when we know it's not safe, it's bad for business? Why are we measuring it that way? Why aren't we measuring how many cars can park in a parking space as opposed to 10 bikes that can park there? Right. So can you talk about that? Have you done that? Is it something we can do more of?
Yeah, it's a really important question around what you measure. I think we've measured the wrong thing for so long. So a big part of our projects from so I should say that we not only do the 2-day, but the full-on 12-month or 18-month kind of planning projects. And as part of connecting the dots is how do you evaluate what happens in the 2 days, which can be this really interesting representative snapshot of okay, how did the businesses feel? How many people were here? On down the line, how many people parked their bikes here, which versus normally, versus the more robust 6-month approach, which I think is the lesson from Morgan Hill, is that they said, okay, it's fantastic for 2 days, we get it. Now we're confident enough to try at least 6 months. And in that 6 months, they can actually measure retail data. So they've partnered with the Downtown Association to measure sales, which is only one indicator, but they are doing foot traffic, bike traffic, car traffic, parking data. So it's really about life on the street versus just movement through it. And I think that helps, and it helps tell your story over time. I can only underscore how valuable the DOT's work in New York City has been to tell that story over time. If they weren't measuring the impact in all sorts of ways of these projects, then I don't think they would have been able to sell more and more of them citywide. So it is really important to get the measurement right and communicate that.
Okay, so I'm going to let you continue your conversations with Mike and Ludo after the session here, and thank you very much to my panelists.